2, a 3. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 14th of April 2018 from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. A little programming note here. We still have an open source report to do on what we call the weekend suites here at WBRN. And we do a number of programs. We'll get that done in the next day or so and get our technical program out. You'll be able to get all of our programs this week starting by just going to bostonred.org, and you'll have links to Stitcher, to iHeartRadio, Speaker, and various other outlets. They will be there, and our Twitter feed, of course, is Boston Red. You can go there. And the Boston Red Times, it's not a newspaper that we put together, but it's a compilation of Twitter feeds that go out from various forces. A nice place to go there. And we're also changing some of the descriptions of our shows to reflect the reality of 2018 and our developing a concept of all about sports. We will be moving to get it more out here, and also international affairs program. So some of the things over the summertime we'll double down on that perhaps we've not doubled down on enough. Today, program we'll talk about a number of things out here. Mr. Kershaw, who is a pitcher for the LA Dodgers, we'll touch upon him. And the former Oriole pitcher before Cannon Yards, Jim Palmer, and his relationship to the Kennedys, and how DNA was able to straighten that myth out. We'll look at it briefly. We won't spend a lot of time on it, however. And we'll also look at the First Amendment as it affects assembly, freedom of speech, etc. As many people are aware, various states have passed so-called protest bills centered around environmental protests primarily, but also Black Lives Matter protests, blocking of interstates, something that Al Sharpton did down in St. Louis in the 1990s. So nothing new there. Dr. King also, you remember the Selma Bridge, etc. So there's really nothing new in this, but what they're doing is they're increasing the penalties to discourage your people from moving forward on that particular front. And on the Second Amendment front, a very interesting situation. The NRA, of course, has its own TV station, channel, which is within the purview of their First Amendment rights, no doubt about that. But what they're using is various cultural figures. Killer Mike comes to mind there as a pro-gun person, targeting young African-American audience, no doubt about it. But where we get to a different kind of situation is the FBI is targeting some of the same people, and they are calling these people African-American or black identity groups. And we'll talk about a young man that got caught up in that particular scenario and spent 5 months in jail, lost his job, lost his house, lost his life, basically speaking. Was not charged with an offense and eventually released. but the stinging part of it on the First Amendment and disruption of lives. Now, in the past, under the director J. Edgar Hoover, they had something called COINTEL. That was basically disruption of African American groups. They targeted Dr. King. They targeted virtually everyone in the movement, and that was on the heels of McCarthyism, where they targeted activists there, left-wing activists, socialists, communists, etc., and just progressives in general. They followed them. They wrote letters about them, all sorts of dirty tricks going on. The same thing with COINTELPRO. They sent Dr. King a letter saying that he should commit harikari, in other words, kill himself, and sent tapes to his wife. Now, this was all done under the official banner of the government of the United States. Very similar to what's going on now with the FBI director there, Jenna Haspin, that was involved in the torture program. So we're seeing many things when you have a center-right administration that's currently in Washington under DJ Trump. And this is part of the manifestations of it. We also see in the Mideast the capital of the Zionists moving from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and as far as the diplomatic corps, very few people showed up, except for a few, as DJ Trump would say, asshole countries. We don't have to spell it out there. DJ already said that. They showed up, and the Zionists showed up, and the American ambassador, and that was about the end of that. At the same time, the security advisor Bolton, excuse me, is threatening various EU members, i.e. Germany, France, the UK, with sanctions for upholding the nuclear accord with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, how this will play out, we don't know, but the situation there is these various nations have self-interest there. They have business relationships, and this brings the front and center the so-called sanctions, economic violence, in other words, where will they have any limitations? And at the same time, we see the emergence of various other what we call blockchain currencies, cryptocurrencies that these nations are exploring. The Islamic Republic of Iran has moved to accept euros as payment for their petroleum products, and not dollars. So in other words, this sanction thing is losing steam. And the Russian Federation has talked about the same thing, alternative to the dollar, coming up with some different type of instruments there. And once that happens, this whole idea of the reserve currency, the dollar, more and more nations will move away from it, China also. So the effects of these boycotts will not be as severe because they will not be passing through the U.S. Treasury. And also at the same time, you will see fewer and fewer U.S. corporations engaging in these international endeavors, such as what's happening on the basics. That situation is that these various, we'll call them joint ventures here, or integrated projects, or what do you want to call them. This is where small EU companies partner with other companies, and because of the breakaway from the UK from the rest of the EU, that is no longer possible. So these are some of the things we'll be covering up here, kind of an overview, not necessarily a point. We'll also look at some polling here, but firstly, let's go to the third largest retail bankruptcy in American history at a company called Was Toys R Us. And the people will speak. They're speaking with Bernie Sanders about what happened to them and their jobs, 30,000 of them. So when you get the news that jobs are being created, yes, jobs are being created, but also jobs are being lost. And this is one of the big problems you have in so-called full employment economies, And this is by their definition of full employment. We used to say 2.2 was full employment. Well, we won't quibble. It could be 3% or it could be 4%, 3.9%. Anyway, once it becomes a full, and many times your participation rate drops because people believe there are no jobs there, or the jobs that are there are not the types of jobs that they have a skill set for those particular jobs. So, in other words, it is kind of the end of the road for them. Let's listen to this. This is Bernie Sanders and the Toys R Us workers.
30,000 workers are losing their jobs.
The whole company is going to liquidate.
Now, my understanding is that financially Toys R Us was actually doing fairly well. Is that the case?
Yes, they walk away with all this money, and hardworking, loyal, dedicated people are left with nothing. We saw the changes when 2005 came in and they took over. We went from public to private owned. The company just didn't seem to care anymore. It was harder and harder to get that family feeling, know that we were going to be taken care of.
And you saw a big change?
We did.
Suddenly there was no investment in the people. It was just, you're just another building, just sell some toys.
And eliminating a lot of full-time positions, which a lot of people lost their health insurance.
Right.
So as a result of that takeover, wages and benefits suffered.
Correct. The liquidation started in February, and we kept saying, well, what's the severance, every week. They were working it out with the bankruptcy judge, and then we were more than halfway into the liquidation, and that's when they let us know that we were getting nothing.
So 30 years and then you're let go without a penny.
They had originally said that there was going to be severance for the first wave of stores, and 2 weeks later, through the bankruptcy court, they said severance is zero.
It's been a family for us. You don't stay at a job for 30 years and not gain connections with the people you work with.
This is brain capitalist.
The people that have been there for so many 30, 40, 50 years, now they're sitting around looking like, well, what else am I going to do? I want to be able to know that in some way my future is certain. And with the way that retail is looking right now, it's kind of frightening.
I want to be able to put my whole self into a company, but then it's like, how can I be excited for the future when people have spent their 30, 40, all of their lives with a company, and then in the end, stuck like, well, what do I do now?
You're making a very important point, and that is when people on the top treat working people with such contempt, people are going to say, why am I going to do my job? Why am I going to go the extra mile, right? Why should we? We're going to get double-crossed. That's a vicious circle.
I'm unemployed right now. I was in the first wave of the first 180 stores that were closed. We were sold a bill of goods because they said in September when they filed for Chapter 11 that we were regrouping, everything was going to be fine, we were all going to be fine.
It's just been a really ill feeling, and I know to ever work for retail again. All I know, for 20 years I started as a part-time sales associate.
It's a hell of a way to treat people.
It's sickening. It's sickening to have people that bend over backwards their whole life and to just have it ripped right from under their feet.
How does this company, these two companies, walk away with $470 million and live with themselves?
Well, that is the question. I think you know it better than I do, that their concern is not for the people who built the company, people who work with the company. You are just numbers on a piece of paper.
People are like, oh, retail is such an easy job. They just stand around, smile, and that's not it. We give you guys the experience. We put our all into making sure that you're happy, your kids are happy. We just want something to show for it. We work hard.
I've gone on 2 job interviews, but neither one of them offered health insurance, which is a deal breaker for me. I have a husband that has some health issues.
This is a tough time for you all. I know. What you're doing is sharing your experience, and there are people who are going to watch this, they're going to start nodding their head because they're going through the same experience. You're not the only people.
We didn't think anybody really wanted to hear our story, so I appreciate everybody's support and can only hope for the best.
The Toys R Us workers and their tragic story. Unfortunately, that happens, and these people have been there 20, 30 years, now in their 50s. Very, very difficult for them to find another job, and if they do, it probably doesn't have health coverage, which means they will have to attempt, depending on what state they live in, to get some type of state aid in the form of Medicaid. And what the requirements are for Medicaid, it varies from state to state, basically at 130% of poverty. Now, many states, the Commonwealth of Kentucky being one, would have a work requirement on top of that to get Medicaid benefits. They already have co-pays and various other things for people on Medicaid that have limited incomes in the first instance. It's not fair, nor is the Toys R Us bankruptcy in the terms of it, walking away with $480 million in fees, etc. And the workers walking away with nothing, not even any severance pay. Now, we don't know the condition of the pensions. Many times these corporations have already raided the pension funds. They went to 401ks, or if they had a defined pension fund, I don't know if they did or not. I'll have to check on that and we'll report back. But the possibility is none of that is available. We did a story on a gentleman out in Tulsa, Oklahoma, had worked for McDonnell Douglas, and when they went bankrupt, he lost his pension, and he ended up at 79 being a greeter at a Walmart store, quite literally, and he has his Social Security, etc. And these are some of the stories of real people. Let's go now to an African-American activist jailed for his Facebook posts, speaks out against secret FBI surveillance. Now, this is Ruka Bolonga, I guess is how he pronounces his name. Balogub. Bolonga. Anyway, Mr. Bolonga, we'll call him. He thought he was dreaming when armed agents, tactical agents, stormed into his apartment. Startled, awoken by a large crash, officers screaming commands. He soon realized his nightmare was real, and he and his 15-year-old son were forced outside of their Dallas home wearing only their underwear. Handcuffed and shackled in the and shaking, in the cold, Mr. Bolonga thought a misunderstanding must have led the FBI to his door. This is on the 12th of December last year, 2017. The father of three said he was shocked to later learn that agents investigating domestic terrorism. You don't hear that word applying to these various assassin types like Mr. Root and company down in South Carolina. He was, had been monitoring him for years and were arresting him that day in part because of his Facebook posts criticizing police. Bologger 34 said, I had not been doing anything illegal for them to have surveillance me. I have not hurt anyone or threatened anyone. He spoke to The Guardian this week, his first interview since he was released from prison after 5 months of being locked up and denied bail while a U.S. attorney tried and failed to prosecute him, accusing him of being a threat to law enforcement and an illegal gun owner. Now, this is back to the NRA, Killer Mike, etc. He lost his home and more while incarcerated. He's believed to be the first person targeted and prosecuted under a secretive U.S. surveillance effort to attract so-called black identity extremists. A leaked August memo in 2017, a report from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Analysis Unit, officials claimed there had been a resurgence in ideologically motivated violent criminal activity stemming from African Americans' perception of police brutality. The counter-terrorism assessment provided a minimal data and evidence of threats against police, but discussed a few isolated events, such as Micah Johnson. He was in Dallas, Texas. The report sparked a backlash from civil rights groups and some people in the Democratic Party, and government would use a broad designation to prosecute activists and groups like Black Lives Matter. Now, this particular individual is kind of interesting here. Beloga, who was working full-time as an IT company when he was arrested, had long been an activist and co-founder of Guerrilla Mainframe and the Huey P. Newton Gun Club. Two groups are fighting police brutality, advocating for the rights of African-American gun owners, the same thing that the NRA has Killer Mike doing. Some of the work included coordinating meals for homeless, youth picnics, self-defense classes, but that's not what interested the FBI, probably, obviously, no doubt about it. Investigators began monitoring Beloga, whose name is Daniels, after he participated in a rally in August in Austin, Texas. That's March 2015. Protesting against law enforcement. That's according to a special FBI agent who testified in court, Aaron Knightley. Knightley said he learned of the protest from a video, and of all things, this is on an Alex Jones station, the center of right-wing conspiracies and fake news. A reference to InfoWars stunned Beloga. They are using a conspiracy theories video for reason to justify their tyranny. That's a big insult. Anyway, Knightley made no mention of Beloga's specific action at the rally, but noted the marchers' anti-police statements. Well, that's in their particular First Amendment rights. Oink, oink, bang, bang. Now, the only good pig is a dead pig. These some of the things that evidently were mentioned there. Bologna posted calling a murder suspect in a police officer's death a hero. Again, that's covered by the First Amendment. It's not prudent, but anyway, expressing solidarity with a man who killed the officers there. They deserve what they got, according to the posts they were quoting. And other things here, the killing of Philando Castile and Alton Sterling, that was in Louisiana. And nonetheless, in a letter Beloga wrote to The Guardian from jail, he said he felt that he had been abducted by the FBI, a political prisoner of war on free speech and the right to bear arms. Authorities were targeting him for promoting black-led community groups and fighting government abuse. He said he was never a threat to anyone, and evidently not. And this is what's interesting about him. They confiscated a .38 caliber handgun and unloaded AK-style assault rifle. Also, he said he took the book with him, Guns by a Civil Rights Leader, Mr. Robert Williams. At the time he wrote this, it was Negroes with Guns. They were really desperate, no doubt about that. But this is where this group, and you can see the group that he founded has a petty bourgeois nature. He goes on to say this is pretty much like Stalin in the 1950s. He didn't talk about the witch hunts here under Joe McCarthy. You show me the man and I show you the crime. Well, that's basically what they've been doing. Anyway, the government's own crime data has largely underestimated the notion of a growing threat from black identity extremist movements, a term invented by law enforcement. And it's on the direction of Beauregard Simpson. Beauregard, what is his last name? Anyway, in addition to the decline in police officers' death, most individuals who shoot and kill police officers is right, are white supremacists there. They're responsible for 75% of the deadly extremist attacks since 2008. And the Gardening goes on to mention the counterintelligence program COINTELPRO, which targeted Dr. King and ACP, and destroyed the Black Panther Party. This is obviously nothing new. This was a report in a Foreign Policy, of all places. It wrote this, and this is showing the gentleman standing there, and Mike Gierman. Anyway, a former FBI agent and fellow with the Brennan Center for Justice, Liberty and National Security, said the FBI's assessment was extremely overboard, and the concept was spreading to law enforcement agencies across the country as more African American activists were facing surveillance and police harassment. Now, what this is, what Gierman is talking about, said the case appears to utilize what they call a disruption strategy, in which the FBI targets. It's sort of like the broken window theory, low-level arrests and charges to interfere with suspects' lives as the agency struggles to build terrorist cases. And nothing was built here, but they did manage to disrupt his life. And this is something to be remembered. Let me just finish this up here. And anyway, Belonger said he also has to accept the fact that the government would probably continue to monitor him, no doubt about it, and could seek new ways to disrupt his life. But the threats won't stop him from organizing and speaking out. As long as my community needs me to serve, I will be there. But what he has done is abandoned the guns. Now, this is a nightmare for my entire family. He added that he was still recovering from isolated incarceration. It was like living like a dog confined to a small backyard. So he has post-dramatic stress syndrome from that. And incidentally, the gun charge came out of a case in Tennessee with some former girlfriend, where he pled guilty. And this is something you advise young men and people in general about, pleading guilty to charges that you are innocent of. You should actually go ahead and litigate your case. He felt it was like a victory. Well, it wasn't a victory. It appeared as a domestic assault on his record. Now, this is from Foreign Policy. Another picture of him is a case in Texas, the first prosecution of a black identity person. This was written in January by Martin D. Beaumont. Nonetheless, this his 15-year-old son, this was on the 12th of December. It basically covers the same thing, but it did talk about the book that they seized by Robert Williams, a civil rights leader who later went to Cuba. He came back. They seized the book, and a domestic assault in Tennessee, minor situation there. Daniels, known to many in the Dallas community, is as Belonga, period. There's his name, but his organizing a name evidently includes unlawful possession of a firearm. I think we talked about in federal custody since December. Rackham, R.A. Kim Belugam. Anyway, nonetheless, the classification used to describe individuals who resort to violence on lawful activity in response to perceived racism and injustice in the American society. This, according to a copy of the report obtained by Foreign Policy magazine. Very interesting here where they use the language, again, perceived racism and injustice there. Well, it's not perceived, it is, in fact, there. Identity extremist classification has grown from a report on paper to national investigations of Black Lives Matter, black gun ownership advocates. I wonder if they're investigating the NRA. Who's, let's see, Daniel's brother, Eufua Bologna, in a statement on the arrest, Raccoon Bologna has been classified, and we must defend him. I'm not sure on this, how they're doing this. Anyway, this is basically a rehash of when he came to their attention. The demonstrator reported by Reason magazine described the magazine as part of a long, if misunderstood, tradition of armed resistance in the African American community against racial oppression. No doubt about that. But if you look in modern times, the African American community, there are plenty of guns there. No doubt about that. Period. And there's reference to a Dallas Morning News article about the Johnson affair. That's the individual involved in the murders there of some police officers. One or two were confirmed as members of the Klan, literally. And let's see, contacted by Foreign Policy to verify details of meeting Agent White and O. Pierce. This is a different situation here, but they were checking in South Carolina. Now, this is the death of Walter Scott there, the new Black Panther Party, who is known to be nothing more than a government front there in South Carolina Secessionist Party. I'm not sure what that is. Oh, I see. That's a right-wing militia, I suppose, type operation. The takeaway from all of this, Minister Louis Farrakhan, happy birthday week to him, he's 85 years old, has always told African American people about the whole idea of guns. Guns themselves create problems, and arming oneself with a cache of guns just plays into the hands of law enforcement, and it's easily can be framed there. That does not mean you don't need to exercise your Second Amendment rights. People have had guns, but it's a very precarious situation, particularly when you pose with sidearms or long arms or whatever. Remember, gun control came about, history came out of California when the Black Panther Party legally walked into legislature in Sacramento with just rifles. And then came the cry for gun control. Before that, there was no cry for gun control. What this shows, what the schism here between the NRA in vocal opposition to gun control and putting Killer Mike on their TV channel advocating there for African American ownership of guns that benefit, of course, obviously the manufacturers of guns in the stores, and they have ranges there. So in other words, there's all kinds of interesting situations here between the right wing and various others. But to conclude this, you look at the movement here, and this gentleman was an IT person, evidently is going back to university and get his life back together again. So this is where this was written while he was actually in foreign policy, where he was actually still in jail there. So the ACLU and others looked at these assessments and found them to run counter to the Constitution, no doubt about that. And various questions here. Anyway, Daniel said he stopped protesting police brutality. He stopped in 2016 to focus his energies on work and other types of community service. Expressed disbelief in his situation. I never expected that this would happen to me. Most people don't. He had went, and this is the Black Panther Party did the same thing. They had the first morning breakfast program. They had medical clinics, community outreach to the community, providing charitable activities. And that's basically what he went into. And no doubt the government perceived those activities as much more of a risk than the previous activities, nonetheless, here. So this is the story of Mr., as foreign policy called him, Mr. Christopher Daniels. Martin D. Beaumont is an editorial fellow at Foreign Policy. Previously worked at the New York Times, for the New York Times in Paris. There, so assume he's French, and also worked in Cambodia. So these are two different views, one after the fact from The Guardian. Now this, the last one here was on the 11th of May, so that was updating the gentleman's story and how he got caught up in this very unfortunate situation. Let me just move on here. We got Toys R Us taken care of, and go to Hawaii. We've been covering the volcanic activity out in Hawaii. And let's see if we can get to it here. This is again from Hawaii News channel here in Hawaii. Officials confirmed 18 fishes as feared about a low plumer growth there. This is on the volcanic activity out in Hawaii. And we'll see if we can get a little bit of this up here. And I think all we're going to get is the storms itself. Maybe not. I'm not sure what we'll get. This is the newscast out of Hawaii. And we try to go to a little bit of here we go.
First at 5, a new fissure claims one more structure and leads to an evacuation order for residents living along another road in Puna. Large explosions from the vent that opened early this morning hurled lava high into the air. The latest fissure has been renamed number 17 because after checking with a geologist out in the field, last night's lava event never erupted. 37 structures, mostly homes, have now been lost. Police went door to door on Halekamahina Loop Road Sunday morning, waking up residents and telling them to evacuate. This after a 17th fissure opened up to the west, or Kalapana side of Highway 132.
I'd say under 10 homes, I think, have been evacuated in that area.
Authorities are only allowing local traffic on Highway 132, also known as Pahoa Kapoho Road, between the Y interchange where it turns into Pohoiki Road, all the way down to Four Corners.
The military likes to have two egress routes or exits out of scary situations. If that road does get cut off, we do start to prepare for mass evacuations in case another one gets cut off. It is a dangerous situation and we're trying to plan for the worst.
The USGS says the new eruption is 1,000 feet long and producing lava spatter, sometimes shooting several hundred feet into the air. A slow-moving lava flow is traveling away from the vent.
Sluggish.
Nonetheless, this ends the report here from the station in Honolulu, why and where they are here. So anyway, we'll leave that particular coverage there. We want to go to this is from the public news service. Here they're studying white hunger, European hunger, homelessness here. And this is Dateline Boston, studying white hunger. Many college students sought to get enough to eat because they lacked the money to buy it. At Worcester State University on Friday, educators, policymakers floated solutions at the Voice of Hunger conference. Now, as research from Temple University found that a third of university students, almost half, 40 to 50% of community college students, don't have regular access to enough food or safe place to sleep. Interviewing at the conference, the lead researcher there, Sarah Gorick, said instead of profiting off of students, colleges could drive down the price of food and offer students meal vouchers if they can't afford to eat in the cafeteria. So thinking about college cafeterias as a place to support college retention and provide grocery scholarships so that students could afford to eat at home as well. Another solution to expand the national school lunch program, which serves children all over the country. We talked about that in the Black Panthers starting that. Now it expires at 18, but it could be extended to struggling college students. And this is one of the situations, one of the proposals in the Commonwealth, Massachusetts, would be subsidized student housing for homeless students and for those who can't afford to live in dormitories. Now, this research here, and we'll do the sports. Just wanted to get a look at the top of it. This is actually Wisconsin Hope Lab is what this is. I thought this was by Temple. I guess it's not. Oh, I guess it is. The Temple University is March 15th. Hunger and homelessness results from a national study of basic needs insecurity in higher education. Report includes 30,000 students at 70 community colleges across 24 states. The results of 2 of 3 community college surveys are food insecurity. Half are housing or insecure. 14% are homeless. These stunning figures were presented in Washington, D.C.'s town hall at George Washington University, where policymakers, etc., were there. This is Sarah Gorick, and some of her findings here, and the opportunities for college and university of all types to participate in the next lab. And we'll append this study on. I won't spend any more time on it. We'll go and do the sports. We talked earlier about the Kennedy connection, supposed connection with Jim Palmer, the former pitcher at the Orioles in Baltimore Orioles. No longer a pitcher there, but basically what the story was, Jim Palmer was born. He didn't really know who his father was, and there was some ambiguity there. And his mother had married a different man and ended up marrying Palmer. But when he was born, he was known as Baby Kennedy. But the Kennedy designation had no relationship to the Kennedy family at all. his present wife found that out through DNA testing. His articles in the Washington Post. We won't go into a long about it, but Palmer, for many years, pushed the myth, let's just say, that he perhaps could be related. He's Irish, no doubt about that. And to the Kennedy family. Yeah, so it just shows you how sometimes myth can turn into reality. But the man is 72 years old now, so again, it is finally put to rest. One more story here. This is from Mr. Kershaw. He's a pitcher there at the L.A. Dodgers. Will he stay off for free agency or stay put after 2018? We don't know. I think he has a contract up to actually 2020. And a part of the problem, he's had some injuries here. Will he go on getting about $35 million annually? And he is one of quote-unquote older players, although he's only 30 years old. But the point we wanted to make here is some of the older players have been losing out in a free agency. Many of them waited around to be picked up. This article is by Buster. Let's see, what is his name? Oni. Here, and health problems. He lists some problems here. Does Kershaw want to go? Well, we don't know. Justin Turner is still there. And then they go on to talk about Zach Greinke. They didn't renew his contract, and he went to the Diamondbacks. And then we have Kenley Jansen and Rick Hill. Of course, they did get deals with the Dodgers. And how much is a legacy worth? Well, Tom Brady, perhaps the best current example of that. And Albert Pujols, the package to Brett Favre, the Cardinals to Albert Pujols. Anyway, some of the people here, and they have a sort of a picture of him and how they treat the league, that is, and teams. Older players in general. They mentioned some here. Mr. Darvish, who is now with the Cubs and hasn't performed as of yet. Yeah, you Darvish. And Jake Arrieta. Jake Arrieta is now with the Phillies. But he sat at home a very long time waiting on someone to pick him up. The article goes on here. Will Kershaw go? He's from Texas. Would he go to the Texas Rangers? We don't know about that. But what we do know about Kershaw is that he doesn't particularly care about money. He's living in the same house he lived in before he got the quote-unquote big contract. So he's of a different breed. Nonetheless, let's do the sports here. And last night's a game of games to end all games, and perhaps so. It was played in Boston. The Celtics 108-83. Unbelievable for the Cleveland Cavaliers. So they lead that series. The Eastern Finals 1-0. For the Cavs. Be a very interesting game. I think they have one more game in Boston. Anyway, nonetheless, tomorrow the action is in the West. The Warriors and Rockets in Houston. It'll be a hellacious game. That'll be later today. And the hockey scores, to get it out of the way while we're here. The Caps 6-2 over the Lightning. And let me see, make sure what we... Caps lead the series at 2-0 there. The Capitals. Yeah. Anyway, over the Lightning. And to baseball scores, I guess the only full... anyway, we have the Rays were in a Camden Yard, and this is an unbelievable score here. 17-1 Orioles over the Rays. The Orioles had 19 hits and 1 error, and the Rays 5 hits and 1 error. I guess you could say it wasn't Tampa Bay's day. Anyway, nonetheless, the Athletics were in New York, Yankees 6-2. The Red Sox were in Toronto, and they beat the Blue Jays 5-1. The Mariners were in the Motor City. Tigers 4-5. 5-4, excuse me. The Atlanta was in Florida. Atlanta 4-3 over the Marlins. The Royals of Kansas City were in Cleveland. Cleveland 11-2. The Lions scored there 15 hits for Cleveland and 2 errors and 9 hits, no errors for Kansas City. Yet they still lost the game. The Mets and Phillies in Philadelphia. Mets 4-2. Giants and Pirates in Pittsburgh. Giants shut out the Pirates. Giants win one. Interesting. The Rangers and Astros in a battle of Texas, I suppose we can call it. The Astros are 6-1 over the Rangers. Kershaw was a loser there. The Crosstown Series, White Sox and Cubs. Cubs in Wrigley Field, of course. White Sox 5-1 in that contest. Mr. Hendricks was the loser. The Brewers and Rockies out in Denver. Brewers won that in 7-3. Interesting. The Twins and Angels in California. Angels 2-1. Angels finally woke up. The Reds and Dodgers in Los Angeles. It was Reds 5-3. The Reds swept the series. First time in a long time for the Reds. No doubt about it. Anyway, what's the new coach there? I can't think of his name right now. But anyway, he got the Reds going. They fired their coach early in the year. Poor coach didn't make it out of April, I think it was there. And nonetheless, he got a bench coach that became a coach. And he's got him on the winning ways, at least for now. The Cardinals and the Padres down in San Diego. It was Padres 5-3. Mr. Wainwright, the knuckleballer, was the loser. The Nationals and D-backs in Arizona. It was the Nationals 6-4. The Dodgers will be going to play in Florida, and then they will end up, I believe, playing the Nationals next week. That will be their schedule to get themselves, as one would say, back together again. Let me just check our time here. We are over time. Sorry about that one. I'm trying to make our reports a little later here, but we did cover the First Amendment, Second Amendment, and we got into Toys R Us workers, all 30,000 of them, that disappeared in the abyss after Bain Capital took over and took them into bankruptcy, took out the money, and left them penniless. This shows what can happen in a modern capitalist society. An unfortunate situation. Again, a programming note, we're working on our technical report. The open source report, we'll talk a little more about blockchain and some of the new bitcoins, particularly something called, let's see, I think I have it here somewhere. Sometimes we do, we don't. Bitbon, I think it is, a new concept. Have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon on the Boston Red Network and WBRN Radio. Good day.